Well, to talk more about the situation in the country and the discovery of this new variant, we're joined by Dr. Rajesh Parikh, Director of Medical Research at Jaslok Hospital, Mumbai, and Dr. Anup Kumar, Professor and HOD, Safdrjung Hospital. Thank you both, doctors, for joining us this morning. Dr. Parikh, first to you. On one hand, the government finally yesterday, after weeks of speculation, saying yes, there is a variant that has been found here in India, a double mutant. However, they've also said this variant is not behind the surge in cases that we're seeing.
Good morning, Gargi. Always a pleasure to be with you. There seems to have been a lag between accepting reality. That's the best one might say. I have been talking about the second wave for well over a year now, initially speculative. Mid-December, I wrote up a policy paper being a little more certain of a second wave that was coming in, just based on what's happened in the past and what's been happening all over the world in the current pandemic, and suggested measures that is now confined to academics. But for quite some time now, Gargi, I have been discussing with you too about a second wave which has been in the country. If you have half a minute, I have a feeling I may have shown this to you before, but if you'll bear with me, I think it's worth looking at again. And here is, if it can be seen clearly, the three waves of the pandemic which occurred 100 years ago. Here they are. And as we can see, the second wave was far more devastating than the first 100 years ago. And the third, though not as bad as the second, was still worse than the first. Now, this has been the pattern. It's an intrinsic feature of pandemics. And we should have been expecting this. We should not be surprised. It was very clear a few weeks ago, not with genomic analysis, mind you, because that hadn't been done yet. But if you looked at the clusters in which the infections were spreading, it did seem like there was a mutant strain. Now it turns out there's more than one. There's a twin mutant in India, and the South African and the UK variants are also spreading through the country. So I think in a way, I'm saddened that we waited this long, but of course relieved because we're finally acknowledging reality. Now comes the second question that you brought up, Gargi, and whether there is a connection between the infectivity and the mutant strains. Only genomic analysis would reveal that, but mind you, this has to be done on a large scale. It has to be done on thousands of people to establish a correlation. I suspect there is a correlation because the way the infectivity is going up. Right. But then again, the last word will be only with genomic analysis. I think what we ought to do is be open to possibilities rather than be in denial.
Right, absolutely. And that graph you showed was frightening. The second wave, those many years ago was really quite much, it was much higher than the first wave. Dr. Anup Kumar, on one hand, the authorities saying that, yes, finally admitting, and this is something a lot of experts, as I said earlier, were suspecting for a while, that there was a more prevalence of variants. We've also found a variant which is unique to India with this double mutation, etc. But on one hand, authorities keep saying now, the only way to fight this, we were speaking earlier if we carried that interview earlier by Dr. V.K. Paul, who said that the only way to fight this is to, continue practicing COVID protocols, etc., etc. But on the ground, the situation is completely different. Here on NDTV, we keep talking about it, keep warning people. But on the ground, you have elections, you have massive rallies, you have, celebrations for upcoming Holi taking place. And, one can just imagine what's going to happen, especially if this variant is found to be more infectious.
Yeah, good morning, Gagi. I think you are absolutely right. See, having mutations of the virus is a normal phenomenon, as we have seen even for common flu, it happens every year. So having the mutations is not the only cause which can explain the rise in the number of cases for last few months. And you can see there, it's a COVID appropriate behavior not being followed anywhere in all those states. And this is very, very apparent. And wherever it has happened, whether it's UK or any other European countries, the second wave has come back. So the second wave is not only because of the mutants, but all because of our we are not following this COVID-appropriate behavior. And I think Dr. Paul, whatever he has emphasized, this is absolutely correct. See, the only way to contain is we have to continue what we were doing earlier. We cannot have some new weapon in our armamentarium. We have to test, track, treat, we have to follow the COVID appropriate behavior. And yes, these mutations, Dr. Parikh is right, we have to carry on these tests on a larger number of scales. Only then we can analyze whether it is a cause of this increased surge or not. But I think it will take a long time. Till that time, we have to follow the appropriate behavior. We have to ban all these gatherings. The administration has to be very, very strict, implement strict fines, and then only the people will be scared of carrying out these kind of proceedings.
Right. I'm sorry, but I just don't see that happening. You know, again, I emphasize that something else is said in the press conferences by authorities, by all you doctors, but on the ground, it's just completely different. The massive election rally is also taking place. Dr. Parikh, the only way to get ahead of this is to, you know, rapidly increase the pace of our vaccination program. And unfortunately, when we started the vaccine drive, at that time, the numbers were so low. A lot of people said, what's the point? We don't even need the vaccines. The numbers have come down. But now we need to, that's the only way to counter it, aggressively vaccinate as many people in as short a time.
Absolutely, Gargi, if I may. Here's another graph which may be of some concern. It's 3 days old. It is showing the vaccination program in various countries. If you look at Great Britain, they have vaccinated nearly 45% of their population. The United States comes a little below, and then you have the European countries. But here, if you look at India, you can see that we've barely vaccinated 3% of our population, while 7% of our vaccines have gone to waste. Because this is another reality we need to deal with. You're absolutely right. We need to escalate the vaccination program dramatically. The government's announcement that from 1st April, people 45 and over will be eligible is appropriate. I think we need to go much further. We need to open it up for everyone. And just one other concern, Gargi, which is not being highlighted, but which I fear will become, another topic of discussion for us in a few days. And that is, in France, the mutant strains are evading the RT-PCR diagnostic test. Now, our strategy everywhere was always to first test, then to isolate. And but if the mutant strains turn out to evade the RT-PCR test in our country, as has happened elsewhere in the world, then we have another problem, and we are left only to one method, and that is COVID-appropriate behavior. The French have a saying, plus ça change. The more the change, the more the same thing. After 100 years, we may still come back to the basics, hygiene, and all the things that go along with COVID-appropriate behavior. We have to be on our guard. We have to accelerate the vaccination program.
Right, and it's been a year of the lockdown, COVID lockdown that we saw, and of course authorities have ruled out any sort of complete lockdown in that sense, but in some areas there have been restrictions. Thank you so much, doctors, for speaking to us, and hopefully more and more people will hear and get that message that they have to continue following all those protocols that have been in place. Thank you for joining us.